It all started on a regular Tuesday night. My roommate, Sarah, and I were just lounging around the apartment, mindlessly scrolling through our phones. Nothing out of the ordinary, just another night. We weren't even watching TV, which was odd for us. That thing is ancient, and we usually have it on in the background, even if it's just playing reruns or some random show. But that night, we didn't even touch the remote. We didn't need to, because out of nowhere, the TV turned on by itself. I remember looking up from my phone, thinking maybe Sarah had hit a button accidentally, but she was across the room, as surprised as I was. The screen wasn't showing any channel, just pure static. That gray, fuzzy noise that looks like nothing, but kind of sucks you in if you stare at it too long. I laughed it off at first. Great, the TV's finally losing it. I joked, but Sarah didn't laugh. She was just staring at it, like she knew something was wrong. I picked up the remote, hit the power button a couple times. Nothing. The static stayed. I held the button down for a bit longer, still nothing. I even tried switching the input, thinking maybe it was stuck on some weird setting, but every button I pressed did nothing. The static just hummed louder, like the TV was mocking me. I groaned, half joking but feeling a little uneasy. Guess it's time to get a new one? But then Sarah, without taking her eyes off the TV, said, "Maybe it's not just the TV." That's when I started to feel a little more on edge. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer. Instead, she walked over and yanked the plug from the wall. The TV should have gone off, but it didn't. The static stayed, flickering like it was more alive than before. I felt my stomach drop. "Sarah, it's still on," I muttered, my voice sounding shaky even to me. Sarah backed up a step, her face pale. How is that even possible? I had no idea, but I couldn't stop staring at it. Something about that static was different now. It wasn't just random white noise anymore. There was something behind it, shapes shifting in and out of the fuzz like shadows moving. I stepped closer, squinting, trying to make out what I was seeing. And then I realized it wasn't just shadows. It was faces. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the TV. The static wasn't just random fuzz anymore. The shapes behind the noise. At first, they were just blurry outlines, like you see when you're half asleep and your mind starts playing tricks on you. But these weren't tricks. As I stared, those outlines started to take form. Slowly, they became faces. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sarah, do you see that?" She didn't respond at first, so I waved my hand in front of her face, snapping her out of whatever trance she was in. "Sarah, look." She finally glanced at the screen, her eyes going wide. "What the hell?" We both stood there, frozen, watching as these faces in the static became clearer. They weren't familiar, at least not to me. They didn't look like actors or anyone you'd see in a TV show. They looked wrong. Their features were distorted, like they were stuck behind some kind of veil, fighting to get through. And the worst part? They seemed aware of us. Their eyes, if you could even call them that, shifted as if they were looking directly at Sarah and me. I felt cold, like the temperature in the room had dropped 10 degrees in an instant. "Is this some kind of glitch?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky now. I shook my head, but I had no idea. "I don't think so. This feels off." As we watched, one of the faces pressed closer to the screen, almost like it was trying to push through. Its mouth moved, but there was no sound, just the constant hum of the static. My hands were clammy, and I could feel my pulse quickening in my throat. "I'm turning it off," I muttered, grabbing the remote again. I clicked the power button, harder this time, but the faces didn't go away. I tried unplugging the TV again, but the screen remained as alive as ever. Static and faces, merging into one grotesque image. "Okay, we're officially haunted," Sarah said with a forced laugh, though I could tell she was just as freaked out as I was. Suddenly, the static shifted again. The faces started to disappear, one by one, until there was only one left. This one wasn't distorted like the others. It was clearer, more defined. A woman's face. She had dark eyes, her expression blank, but something about her felt familiar. Like I'd seen her before, but I couldn't place where. "Who is that?" Sarah whispered, stepping closer to the screen. Before I could answer, the static flickered once more, and the woman's face started moving. Slowly, her lips parted, and she began to speak. But again, there was no sound. Just the same, unbearable buzzing from the static. Her mouth formed words we couldn't hear, but I could swear she was saying, "Help me." Goosebumps rose on my arms, and I stepped back. "Sarah, we need to do something." But before we could even decide what that something was, the woman's face vanished. The static roared back, louder than before, filling the room with that awful white noise. And then, like some kind of sick punctuation, words appeared on the screen. They were written in the same erratic way the faces had emerged, slowly forming one letter at a time. "Let US out," I gasped, and Sarah clutched my arm. We were both staring at the words on the screen, hearts pounding, minds racing. It wasn't some glitch, it wasn't a prank, it wasn't anything we could explain away with logic. This felt real. "What the hell is this?" Sarah cried out, backing away from the TV like it might reach out and grab her. I didn't have any answers. My mind was going 100 miles an hour, but I couldn't come up with a single explanation that made sense. And then, like clockwork, the TV flickered again. The words vanished, replaced by an image of a room. A different room, not ours. The screen showed a small, dimly lit living room with old, mismatched furniture. I could see a door in the corner of the shot, slightly ajar, and nothing else. The camera, or whatever it was positioned in the center of the room, but there was no sound, no movement. Just that eerie, silent shot of the door. "I'm seriously about to smash this thing," I muttered under my breath, inching closer to the TV, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Suddenly, the door in the image creaked open just a little more. "What's behind that door?" Sarah whispered, as if she was afraid to speak too loudly. I didn't answer because I didn't know. We were glued to the screen, waiting for something to move, to reveal itself. Seconds passed, then minutes. The door swayed slightly, but nothing else happened. The tension in the room was thick, suffocating. I could barely breathe. Then, from the corner of the screen, something moved. It was subtle at first, just a shadow, barely noticeable. But as it moved closer to the camera, it became clearer. A figure, tall and humanoid, stepped into the frame. I couldn't make out any features. It was like it was made of darkness itself, just a silhouette of a person. My heart stopped. "Turn it off," Sarah said, her voice shaking with fear. I didn't need to be told twice. I lunged for the TV, frantically pressing the power button, but the screen stayed on, the figure inching closer to the camera, closer to us. The screen flickered again, and the figure lifted an arm, pointing directly at us. And then the screen went black. For what felt like an eternity, the screen stayed black, and the room fell into an eerie silence. Sarah and I stood frozen, staring at the TV as if it might spring back to life at any moment. My hands were shaking, and I could hear Sarah's breath coming in short, ragged bursts beside me. "I think it's done," she whispered, though she didn't sound convinced. I wasn't convinced either. Something still felt wrong. The air in the room was heavy, thick with tension, like we were waiting for something else to happen. I wanted to say something to break the silence, to reassure both of us that it was over, but the words wouldn't come. My heart was still pounding in my ears, drowning out everything else. And then, just as I thought we might actually be safe, the TV turned back on. This time it wasn't static. It wasn't the dark figure or the shadowy room. Instead, the screen showed nothing, just pure blackness. No images, no movement. But that wasn't what sent chills down my spine. It was the sound, low at first, barely audible, a crackling, whispering noise, like someone was trying to talk through a radio but couldn't quite make it through. The static was still there, faint, but underneath it, I could hear a voice. Sarah heard it too. She stepped back, her hands clutched tightly at her sides, eyes wide with fear. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, too scared to say anything. The voice was clearer now, but it was distorted, broken, like listening to a bad signal on a walkie-talkie. I couldn't make out the words at first, but as it continued, the message slowly became clearer. "Help us, trapped." It was a woman's voice, the same voice I was sure I'd seen mouthing words in the static earlier. Her tone was desperate, strained, like she was trying to reach out to us, but couldn't get through the barrier of the screen. The sound sent chills down my spine, every hair on my arms standing on end. I stepped closer to the TV, as if getting nearer might help me hear her better. "Help please," trapped inside. Sarah grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Don't go near it." But I couldn't help it. I was drawn to the voice, compelled by the urgency in it. What if she's really stuck in there? I muttered more to myself than to Sarah. "That's insane," Sarah shot back, shaking her head. "People don't get stuck in TVs. This is some freaky glitch or something. Or maybe someone's screwing with us. But there's no way someone's actually in there." I didn't respond because deep down I wasn't so sure. This didn't feel like a prank. It didn't feel like a simple tech malfunction. This felt personal. The voice coming through the TV wasn't just some random sound. It was pleading like whoever it belonged to was desperate for help. I could almost feel the fear in her voice, like she was running out of time. The voice crackled again, louder this time. "Please, we can't get out." I turned to Sarah. "We have to do something." She shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. No way. We don't even know what's going on. This could be dangerous." But before we could argue about it, the TV screen flickered, and the voice cut out abruptly. The silence that followed was even worse than the static. I could feel my heart pounding harder, my mouth dry with fear. We waited, breathless, for something else to happen. And then, without warning, the TV screen lit up again. But this time, it wasn't static. It wasn't the shadowy figure or the empty room we'd seen before. It was our apartment. I gasped. The screen was showing us. It was like a live feed filmed from the corner of the room, but there was no camera there. We were on the screen, standing exactly where we were now, in front of the TV. The angle was all wrong. Too high, too far back, like we were being watched by something that wasn't even there. Sarah's face drained of color. "What? How is that possible?" I shook my head, my stomach twisting in knots. "I don't know." I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. It was like looking in a mirror, except this wasn't a reflection. This was real time, showing us exactly how we were, standing terrified in front of the TV. And then, just as suddenly as the image had appeared, something changed. On the screen, the door to our apartment, the door right behind us, slowly creaked open. We both spun around, but the door was closed. Locked. There was no one there. But when I looked back at the TV, the door was still opening on the screen, inch by inch, until it revealed the dark hallway beyond. A shadow moved at the edge of the frame. Sarah let out a strangled gasp, backing away from the TV. "This isn't real. It can't be real." But as we watched, the shadow in the hallway moved closer to the camera. It wasn't like the figure we'd seen before. This one was more defined, more human in shape, but still shrouded in darkness. I could feel my pulse racing as the figure stepped into the room on the screen, moving towards us. My breath hitched. It looked like it was coming straight for us. And then, just as the figure reached the spot where we stood in front of the TV, the screen cut to black again. The room was silent. For a second, neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. I was too terrified to even think. All I could do was stare at the TV, waiting for whatever was going to happen next. My heart was in my throat, my skin cold as ice. Then, a whisper broke the silence. It was the same voice from before, but this time it was right behind us. "Let us out." I froze in place, my entire body tensing up as that whisper echoed through the room. It was right behind us, close enough that I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Sarah must have heard it too, because she gasped and gripped my arm so tightly it hurt. I wanted to turn around to see if there was actually someone or something standing behind us, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of concrete. My eyes were still glued to the black screen of the TV, waiting for it to come back on, for the figure on the other side to reappear. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Yeah." We both stood there, completely still, afraid to move or even breathe too loudly. The whisper had been so clear, so close, but when I forced myself to glance over my shoulder, there was nothing. Just our empty apartment, dimly lit by the single lamp in the corner of the room. The door was still shut, and there were no signs of anyone else being there. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was with us. Something we couldn't see. What the hell is happening? Sarah asked, her voice shaking with fear. I don't know, I replied, my own voice barely a whisper. But we need to do something. This isn't normal. I turned back to the TV, half expecting it to flicker back on with another horrifying image. But the screen remained black. The silence in the room was suffocating, pressing down on us like a weight. I could feel my pulse hammering in my chest, and my hands were damp with sweat. Sarah tugged at my arm, breaking me out of my daze. We need to leave. Now. We need to get out of this apartment. She was right. Every instinct in me screamed to get out of there, to run as far away as possible. But as we took a step toward the door, something strange happened. The air in the room shifted, just for a second, and then the lights flickered. The lamp in the corner buzzed and dimmed, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. And then, with a sudden, sharp click, the TV turned back on. Sarah and I stopped dead in our tracks, both of us turning to look at the screen, our hearts racing. This time, there was no static, no shadowy figure or creepy living room. Instead, the screen showed a different room, one we hadn't seen before. It was much darker, almost pitch black, but we could make out the outlines of what looked like old furniture. A single chair sat in the center of the room, facing the camera. And sitting in that chair was the woman, the same woman we had seen earlier in the static, the one who had mouthed the words, "Help me." But now, she was clearer, more distinct. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, with dark rings under her eyes, and her hair hung in messy strands around her face. She wasn't moving, just staring straight ahead, her eyes wide and hollow. I couldn't tell if she was alive or not. "What is this?" Sarah muttered, her voice filled with disbelief. I shook my head, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that something about the woman's face, her expression, was filled with pure terror, like she had seen something unimaginable. And the worst part? She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking at something behind it, something we couldn't see. And then, just like before, the voice returned. "Help us." It was a whisper, soft but unmistakable. "We're trapped." I leaned in closer to the TV, my heart thudding in my chest. "Who are you?" I asked aloud, not really expecting an answer. For a moment, the room was silent, and then the woman on the screen shifted. Slowly, painfully, her head turned toward us, her eyes locking with mine through the screen. My blood ran cold. There was something unnatural about the way she moved, like she was being forced to look at us. "Let us out," the voice repeated, louder this time. And then it hit me. The way the woman's lips moved, the way her voice seemed to echo through the room. It was like she wasn't just trapped on the screen. She was trapped inside the TV. My hands clenched into fists, and a wave of panic washed over me. "Sarah, we have to do something." They're stuck in there." Sarah stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "What are you talking about? We can't help them. They're not real. This whole thing, it's impossible." But I wasn't so sure. The look in the woman's eyes was too real, too human, to be anything else. I took a deep breath and stepped closer to the TV, my heart pounding in my ears. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. For a long moment, there was no response. The woman on the screen remained still, her eyes wide and terrified. And then, without warning, the screen flickered again, and the room went completely dark. "Let us out," the voice whispered again, but this time it came from everywhere around us, inside us. I felt my entire body tense up, fear crawling up my spine. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and the TV screen lit up once more. But this time, it wasn't the woman. It was us, our apartment, the same image we had seen earlier, with Sarah and me standing exactly where we were now, looking at the TV. Only this time, the image on the screen wasn't a live feed. It was us trapped inside the TV. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. No way," I muttered. Sarah's eyes were wide with horror as she stared at the screen. This can't be real. We're not." But before she could finish, the TV flickered again, and the screen went black. The whisper echoed one final time, chilling and relentless. "Let us out." The room was dead silent after the TV went black, leaving only the low hum of electricity still coursing through the wires. Sarah and I stood frozen, staring at the lifeless screen, our own reflections barely visible in its glossy surface. The last image of us trapped inside the TV burned in my mind, and I could feel my legs trembling beneath me. It couldn't be real. None of this could be real. Sarah's breath was coming in ragged gasps now. I could see her panic rising, and I knew I wasn't far behind. We have to get out of here," she stammered, her voice filled with terror. "We can't stay here." I nodded, my throat dry, and I turned toward the door, the only thing that made sense in this nightmare. My hand reached for the doorknob, desperate to escape, but just as my fingers grazed the cold metal, the door rattled violently. I jumped back, my heart slamming against my ribs. The door didn't open, though. It stayed locked, secure, like it had been the whole time, but I knew it had moved, shaking like something or someone was on the other side. I glanced at Sarah, who was pale as a sheet, her eyes wide and glued to the door. "What was that?" she whispered, but she didn't want an answer. Neither of us did. The TV crackled back to life. My stomach dropped, and I turned slowly, dreading what we might see next. The screen was back on, but instead of static or that eerie living room from before, the image was clearer now. We were looking at our apartment again, but this time it was empty. No shadows, no figures, just the same room we were standing in right now, only slightly off, like it had been abandoned for years. There was dust on the furniture, and the air looked heavy, thick, as if no one had lived there for a long time. "What the hell?" Sarah breathed, stepping closer to the TV, her voice trembling with fear. I took a hesitant step forward, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this some kind of warning? A vision of the future? I didn't know, but something deep inside me was screaming that whatever we were seeing wasn't good. "Sarah," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper, "we need to figure out what's going on. This can't just be random. There has to be a reason." She shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. No, there's no reason. This is a nightmare, and we need to leave now." But we couldn't leave. I wasn't even sure we could anymore. The door wouldn't budge, and something about the TV, it felt like it had taken control of our apartment, like it was keeping us here. I didn't know why or how, but I could feel it. We were trapped just like the voices on the other side. What if? I hesitated, the idea sounding insane even as it formed in my mind. What if this isn't just the TV? What if it's something more? Sarah stared at me, not following, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "What are you saying?" I took a deep breath, the pieces starting to click together in my mind. The voices, the woman we saw, I think they're trapped in there, in the TV. And now it's like it's trying to trap us too. Sarah's face twisted with disbelief. "Are you serious right now? People don't get trapped in TVs. That's crazy." "I know it sounds insane," I said quickly, "but what if that's what's happening? What if this TV is like a portal, some kind of prison?" We saw them, Sarah. The faces. They were real. They were begging for help. She shook her head again, taking a step back. "No, I'm not listening to this. We need to find a way out. We need to." The door rattled again, harder this time, cutting her off. We both whipped around to face it, and I felt my pulse quicken. Something was definitely on the other side. My skin crawled with the realization that it wasn't just the TV we had to worry about anymore. Whatever had been lurking behind that door on the screen, it was here now. It was real. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the door, like something was throwing itself against it, trying to force its way in. Sarah let out a strangled cry and backed away, pressing herself against the wall, her hands over her mouth. My own fear was paralyzing, but somehow I managed to stay focused. What if? I started thinking quickly. What if we can stop this? What if we can break the connection? Sarah looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. How? How the hell do we stop any of this? I didn't know exactly, but something told me the TV was the key. Whatever had started with the TV had to end with it. I rushed over to the television, grabbing the remote once again, but pressing buttons was useless. The TV wasn't responding to anything we did. It was controlling us now, not the other way around. "Help us!" The woman's voice crackled through the static again. "We're trapped. Let us out." The sound was everywhere, louder this time, echoing off the walls like a chorus of desperate souls. I slammed my hand against the side of the TV, desperate for it to stop, for something to change. Then something clicked in my mind. "The plug!" I shouted. "Sarah, we need to pull the plug. We have to cut it off completely." "But we tried that already," she yelled back, her voice panicked. "I know, but it's the only thing left." I ran to the wall, grabbing the power cord, and yanked it out of the socket. For a second, nothing happened. The screen still flickered, showing that eerie, dust-covered version of our apartment. My heart sank, but then the screen began to fade, the static creeping back in like the signal was losing strength. "We're almost out," I said, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time. Sarah ran over to help me, and together we pulled harder, yanking the old TV off its stand. It fell with a crash, sparks flying as it hit the floor. The lights flickered again, and the room went black for a moment. I held my breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. And then, just like that, the room was silent. The TV was off, the whispers were gone, and the banging at the door stopped. We stood there in the dark, breathing heavily, the weight of everything that had just happened pressing down on us. But it was over. At least it seemed that way. "Do you think?" Sarah started, her voice shaky. "Do you think we're safe now?" I looked at the TV, now broken on the floor, and nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think we did it, but deep down, I wasn't sure. Something still didn't feel right." The silence that followed was unsettling, heavy, like the air in the room was holding its breath with us. Sarah and I stood in the middle of the wrecked living room, staring at the broken TV on the floor. The screen was shattered, wires and glass strewn across the carpet. For a moment, all I could hear was the sound of our breathing, sharp and uneven, as we both tried to calm down. "We did it," I whispered, more to myself than to Sarah. "It's over." Sarah let out a shaky breath, wiping the sweat from her forehead. I can't believe this actually happened. That thing, that TV, what the hell was that?" I didn't have an answer. How could I? We had just survived something we couldn't even explain. The TV wasn't normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been more than just some haunted object. It had felt alive, like it had a mind of its own, a purpose. "We should get out of here," I said, breaking the silence. My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. "We need to leave, just in case." Sarah nodded quickly, already halfway to the door. "Yeah, let's go. I don't care where. I just can't be in here anymore." I followed her, but as we reached for the door, something stopped me. A strange feeling, like I was being watched, crawled over my skin. I hesitated, turning back to look at the room once more. Everything seemed normal now. The TV was destroyed, and there was no sign of the shadowy figures or the eerie whispers. But something still felt off, like we weren't really free yet. "Come on," Sarah urged, tugging at my arm. "Let's go." I took one last look at the mess we had made, the broken TV, the scattered glass, and finally turned away. We stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind us. The familiar scent of old carpet and dusty walls hit me as soon as we were outside, and for a moment, I felt a small sense of relief. We had escaped. Whatever that was, we were out. But then, just as we started to walk down the hallway, I heard it, a faint buzzing. It was barely noticeable at first, just a soft hum like a distant radio signal. But as we walked farther, it grew louder. The sound was familiar, too familiar. I stopped in my tracks, my heart racing all over again. "Do you hear that?" I asked Sarah, my voice trembling. She paused, listening, her face going pale when the noise registered. No, she muttered, covering her ears. "It's not real. It's not happening again." But it was. The unmistakable crackling of static was growing louder, echoing down the hallway like it was chasing us. My mind raced as panic set in. It couldn't be the TV. It was broken. We had destroyed it, right? So why was the static still following us? I looked around, desperate for an explanation. The hallway was empty. No sign of anyone else. No source for the noise. But it was there, creeping closer, like it was crawling through the walls, seeping into the air around us. "Run," I said, grabbing Sarah's arm. "We need to run." We bolted down the hallway, our footsteps echoing against the hard floor. The static seemed to follow us, getting louder with every step we took. By the time we reached the stairwell, it was deafening, filling the space with a horrible, grating noise that made my ears ring. As we ran down the stairs, my mind flashed back to the TV. That last image of us, trapped inside. Was that what had happened? Had the TV somehow trapped part of us in there, even after we broke it? The thought was too terrifying to fully grasp, but it gnawed at the edges of my mind as we fled the building. We burst through the front doors of the apartment complex and into the cool night air, gasping for breath. The static had stopped, replaced by the quiet hum of the city. For a second, I thought we were finally safe. But then I saw it. Across the street, in the window of the old electronics repair shop, there was another TV. An old, boxy model, probably just as ancient as the one we had in our apartment. It sat in the shop's dusty display window, flickering faintly in the dim light. And on the screen, it was us, Sarah and me, standing outside the apartment, looking at the TV in the shop window. "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible. My legs felt like they were going to give out. Sarah turned to follow my gaze, and when she saw what I saw, she let out a strangled cry. "How is this possible? We're not inside there." But we were. I didn't know how, I didn't know why, but the truth was staring back at us from the screen. We were inside that TV, just like the voices we had heard before. The static, the whispers, the images, it was all part of something bigger. Something we couldn't escape. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking with desperation. I had no answer. There was nothing we could do. Whatever force had trapped us in that apartment had followed us, and now it was spreading. I stared at the screen, at our reflections, and felt a cold, sinking dread take hold of me. We weren't just haunted. We were part of it now. The static buzzed again, louder this time, like it was pulling us closer. And then, without warning, the TV in the shop window flickered off, leaving us standing in the empty street, surrounded by nothing but the hum of the city and the echo of static that we could still feel deep in our bones. It wasn't over. It would never be over.